Yeah, this is a video I just thought of doing. I was originally going to do this as a regular video, but I thought let's do a live because live videos are fun. And yeah, there's this lot that can be discussed on this one. Um, and so what I was like the original concept for this video, I was just thinking about the NES. The hopefully you can hear me. I got my microphone set up here. Um, the NES is an interesting system in that it came out at a time when we almost thought a lot of the video game consoles were done. And in my case, video gaming never really stopped because I played on my Commodore 64, and at that time I had I started off on the Intellivision and then worked my way up to the I guess right after the Intellivision was the Commodore 64. And so I ended up, kind of getting into that. And the console wars to me didn't really affect me too much. But I did see it was kind of happening. And I knew a lot of people who had things like the ColecoVision. I knew somebody who had an Atari. I knew somebody, somebody on the street had something. I had a friend down the street. I actually had two friends down the street that had a Vic 20. I had a couple of friends who had the Intellivision as well. I had a friend who had Atari. I had a friend who had Coleco. So at the time, I could see that there was multiple consoles going on, and it it was all about the games at that point, going to the arcade, seeing what the arcades had to offer, going home to your console, wishing your console could play games just like the arcades. And it was just kind of like that. And I kind of, because I was stuck in the Commodore 64 era, I didn't really see the decline of the Atari Intellivision. Like, I kind of saw the Intellivision declining because of the sales, going into the stores, seeing them marked down, seeing less product on the shelves. In fact, I even remember going into one of the computer stores in the local mall, much later on in life, much later on during the time, I should say, and seeing a couple of Intellivision games for sale, and I was kind of blown away that they were still selling them. At that point, that's when I started to realize, a lot of the video games are going away. But then when Nintendo came out, and my friend, he had uh, he got a Nintendo before I even heard of the name Nintendo. Like obviously the name Nintendo was around, but I mean as a console or system, as something to play games on, didn't exist for me. Uh, it was more like he showed me this console and he's like, "Yo, you check this out," and he put on Super Mario Brothers, and I'm like, "Holy crap, this looks cool." He had the other game that he had was Zelda, and I've never seen a game like this in my life. Like, him playing this was just amazing, and I wanted to like play it so badly. In Super Mario Brothers, so it was just one of those things where it just, seeing these games for this first time, the 8-bit graphics, you know it blew me away. And yeah, so even though I still love the Intellivision, it was always my favorite console because I grew up with it. It was my thing. It was when I was a kid. It was the introduction for me into video games. And even though like arcades existed, I grew up with the Intellivision. But seeing the Nintendo was a completely different experience, and it was kind of a mysterious thing to me. Like when it first came out, it was a very mysterious thing. I was like, my friend had one. I didn't know what it was. I don't even know if I even recall seeing commercials for it. It was a thing that my friend had, and at that point, I'm like, I got to get one of these things. And of course, everybody started talking about it at school. It's sort of the buzz went around, and all these games, the video rental stores started to carry the games, and that was a completely new experience to me as well. I did hear, I remember seeing on, I think on the Atari Age forums and stuff like that, some people saying that, their local ma and pa rental shop rented out Atari games or something like that. But for me, the Nintendo, that was the first time I've actually seen that happen, where video games were something you could rent, and that blew me away. I was just like, "Whoa, I can go in there and I can get a game for like $3, $4, go home and play it, and then, and a lot of times, some of these, especially Nintendo, a lot of the games you only wanted to play it for a little bit of time, anyways. Some games you could actually rent it and complete the game and then return it. Or just try it out. Maybe just try it out, see if you like it before you have to return it. Um, and it would be a good indicator of whether you actually wanted to buy the game. Because at this point in time, um, like for Commodore, the Commodore 64, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, I grew up playing on the Commodore 64. A lot of times you were getting games from people. You'd get disc loads of games. I got my disc box down here. It's like full of games. Most of the time, you weren't even paying for these. But for games like the Intellivision, the Atari, the ColecoVision, you had to buy the game, and whether you like it, um, is that Mega Sand? Hey, whether you liked the game or not, or had any exposure to it, you kind of went by it. You'd buy the box. You'd see the box. You'd be like, "That looks cool." You'd see something like this. You'd be like, "Look, it's gold box. It looks cool. It's got all this stuff on it." You'd buy the game and then go home, try it out, and if you didn't like it, you were kind of stuck. So it was really cool that the Nintendo had this era of games you could rent. And of course, this was like the beginning of this. Like, as far as like going to Blockbuster, and you know we we had here in the Greater Toronto area where I live, in Canada, we had a store from the Rogers Corporation that runs the cable networks and all that stuff. They had a video store, Rogers Video, and I would go there. And yeah, obviously after the whole Nintendo rental thing, they had the PlayStation rental games, and all the other rental games. You can just go in there and buy the rent them. Um, but at the time, during the early 80s, like the 80, 86, 87, 88, when you can go down and rent a game that you definitely couldn't just run out and buy because, money, cost. Like, I remember renting this game, Super Mario 3. I mean, ever since the movie The Wizard, when it came out, and everybody saw this game and they were like, "Oh my god, I gotta have that game." Obviously, when it was came available, you were able to rent it, and I remember putting my name in to get on the spot to rent one, because even at that time, uh, a rental store might only have a select amount of copies, and I remember renting it, and I could not wait to play this game. I like Super Mario 3. I was like, I'm sold, because I liked the second one. I liked the first one. The second one was a little bit different than the first one, which I thought was cool. Completely different gaming experience. Yes, I know it was not the original Super Mario Brothers 2. Uh, I know that it changed. It was they took Doki Doki Panic and put Mario skins on it, but still, for me at that time during the Nintendo era, I thought it was brilliant. I'm like, wow, they really just took the original Super Mario game and just kind of added this whole new flair to it. And then when we saw Super Mario 3, which is almost like a kind of a blending of the two games, they took the first and the second game, they blended together, made it bigger, and they made this masterpiece. And I remember renting this, and actually, I think I probably rented it a few times, because the first time I actually rented it, I ended up staying up like most of the night playing it, and I think I was supposed to have it for the next day, but then I had to go somewhere. I had to go to a family member's house, and I was really upset about it because I rented this game and I wanted to play it. And my father was like, "No, we're going to grandma's house, or I think that was where we were going. And I was so annoyed because I just wanted to sit at home and play on my Nintendo. And I never had that experience before. Like, my Intellivision was a great system, but I never had that, like, I want to stay at home and play my Intellivision feel. Like, it was never that way. It was more like I got time to kill, or I'm homesick, or I just feel like playing a game of Donkey Kong Jr. or something like that, or Snafu, or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons on my Intellivision. So I just throw it on there and I just start playing it. Whereas the Nintendo, it was the first time that I actually wanted to play the game. Like, I just was like, I want to get home from school so I can play on my Nintendo. It was kind of a weird thing. Like, I've never had that experience. And like I said, with my friend, when I went to my friend's house and he had the Nintendo long before I did, it was like a special thing to him. He was like, be careful with it. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I was he would let me play some of the games, and he was very particular about the Zelda game. Like, be careful with the Zelda game. Like, it was like this magical system. Um, and it was like, I always knew at that point I got to get one of these things, but I knew it would at that time. Obviously, it was like, they were expensive to a point. um you didn't just be like, "Oh, mom, go buy me a Nintendo," and then it happened, right? And so, yeah, it was one of those systems. In fact, I even remember buying, I because I couldn't afford the Nintendo at the time, or I didn't want to fork out the money or whatever. I ended up getting my Atari Junior to try and fill in that gap, because Atari Junior was being sold around that time. It was like 1989, I think, 98, 89, 90, when the Atari Junior came out, and it was really cheap. And it was like, I think it was like $50 or something for the console, and the games were really cheap. And so I ended up buying one of those, thinking that, I'm probably a long time away from getting my hands on a real Nintendo Entertainment System. And then one day I was in the store, with my father. We were at the mall, and they had we went into one of the stores. It was like a department store, and they had the NES, the what do they call it? The Super Pro System thing, where it came with the light zapper, the gun, and Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. And I saw it there, and I pointed. I'm like, "Oh, Dad, yeah, I want to get one of those so bad." That type of dealio. And he just picked it up, and he's like, "Okay." And I was like completely blown away. I was like, "Whoa!" you know, that was new to me. Like, he just, all right, he grabbed it off the shelf and bought it for me, and I was like, okay. And so after that, I'm like, okay, there's certain games I have to have. Um, Obviously, it came with Super Mario Brothers, which I played the heck out of. I mean, I just sat down and played that. I just continued playing that game. But I knew I had to have Tetris. Tetris was another one of those. Much like, the Game Boy right there, which I believe that game sold that unit there. The fact that it was sold with Tetris coming up to 2600 Nintendo was a revelation, mind blown. Yeah, exactly. It did. It blew the minds off of us. And I was just like, I gotta have Tetris. I started building this little database of games that I gotta have in my system. Um, but that's where the rental came in. That's where it became, when I went to my local rental shop and I saw they started renting out Nintendo games. I'm like, oh my god, I gotta get these games. In fact, one of the ones I remember renting quite a bit too was this one, Back to the Future. Now I know you're gonna look at this and be like, oh god, yeah, this is not um, any way kind of resembling the movie in much. I mean, there's pinches to it. Obviously, the location and some of the characters in it, um, but still, Back to the Future was my favorite movie of the day. Um, and when I saw there was a Nintendo game for it, I had to play it. I rented it. I didn't care. I'm like, it's Back to the Future. I'm renting it. I'm gonna play it. And I probably rented this. I probably rented this a few times because it's a hard game. It's tedious. It's hard. There's not a lot of levels. It's not long. I mean, I ended up buying it later on when Nintendo games started to become really cheap. And I remember that time that I'd go into like the local Kmart and they would have bins of Nintendo games for like $10 and or whatever, 9.99 or something like that, 6.99. They dirt cheap. They weren't brand new. They were sold like this with plastic on it or cardboard. Some of them came with a manual that looked like it was photocopied on white paper, but I didn't care. It was still a Nintendo game, and I was buying it. And I think that's where I got this. I think I got this from one of those things. Um, some of the video game stores were popping up, and they were showing they had a lot of Nintendo games. But that, definitely, I picked up Back to the Future, and I had to play it. Another one that I ended up loving, actually got it over there, is RoboCop. Um, I loved RoboCop in the arcade. It's one of my favorite arcade games to play. I played it a ton of times, and when I found out that RoboCop was on the Nintendo, I definitely had to have it, and I got hooked on playing that game. It again, it's not the greatest game, but it still kind of gives that feel of RoboCop, and I enjoyed playing it. I thought it was really good. So Nintendo did end up giving us a lot of these like um, really good IPs, like Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, the game is hard as nails, but I still enjoyed playing it. I have mine still over there. Um, the other one, what was I was gonna say there? There's Ninja Turtles was one. Oh, The Simpsons. That was another one. I love The Simpsons. My mom knew I loved The Simpsons, and they came back from vacation. I can't remember where the heck they went. My parents always went on vacation places. But one time she came back and she had the Bart versus the Space Mutants game that she found. I was like, no way! There's a Simpson game on the Nintendo. So there was just so much going on with Nintendo that was just so different from the other consoles that existed. So yeah, there's a lot of great memories, and I think even though I will say that the Intellivision is the one that I grew up with, and it's still carries that little special place. I still say there's a lot of special memories, and the Nintendo is pretty special in itself, and also what it did to the gaming market and kind of revitalizing what was almost thought to be dead during the 80s. With our North American video game crash, where we thought video games were toast. Um, and even though, like I said earlier, I was still playing my Commodore 64 at the time, and I didn't even notice the crash was happening around me, which is interesting because that's kind of how it was in Europe. Like they didn't really see the crash; it didn't really happen to them because they were playing on the ZX Spectrum, they were playing on the Commodores, they were playing on whatever, um, all these different computers. They didn't really realize a console war or a console crash or any of that stuff was even happening necessarily. Um, so having the Nintendo kind of, I don't know, fix that, have it affect the console industry the way it was, and it kind of revolutionized. I remember watching a thing on the Video Game Wars or one of those shows, and they were talking about how it's they tried to sell the Nintendo as essentially, like they said, an entertainment system, not just a video game console, which is why they had things like that Rob the Robot thing, which I never really saw an appeal to it. I just looked at it as a gimmicky second player AI component. Um, you know, yeah, it looks kind of neat. I would never really go out of my way to want to get one, spend the money on one. Um, but saying that, I mean, it was neat. It was something different. There wasn't like none of the consoles before it had that. Like a lot of the consoles before it had a lot of the similar stuff. They had like a trackball, a steering wheel, driving controllers. Like there, a lot of the same stuff was just kind of repeated throughout. Whereas Nintendo was said, "Hey, look what we got. We got this Rob the Robot character. Being sold with a gun. That wasn't a common thing. Yeah, there was some older systems that did have a gun that kind of worked similar, I guess, but it wasn't like mainstream. Like obviously the Intellivision didn't have one. ColecoVision, I don't think ever had one. Um, I know the Atari computer, the what was it, the XE? One of the computers came with a gun. But seeing there was those older systems. I saw a couple of those old consoles where it was like had a steering wheel, had a gun, and had this, and but they were very primitive in comparison. To have a game like Duck Hunt and you know what was the other one? There was a bunch of the game Hogan's Alley, and you can actually. Unfortunately, with my experience with the gun, though, it was pretty much Duck Hunt because that's what came with the console when I got mine. It had the Duck Hunt game. Um, I don't know if I even have any other games that work with the light gun. Now that I think about it, um, pretty much just Duck Hunt. But still, it was cool to have this kind of feature. And then, of course, the Sega Master System was out, and it was kind of, I guess, the rival. Like my other cousin from the other side of my family, they had a Sega Master System, and I remember going to his house and he showed it to me, and I'm like, so it's basically a black Nintendo, like it's a like he was putting on the games and stuff. I'm like, interesting. They had the light gun and all that. I'm like, I just kind of compared it to it's kind of like Nintendo, but I wasn't very familiar with it. I didn't know a lot of the games that he had there. He had Space Harrier and some other things, but nothing in comparison to the way the Nintendo had that appeal to it. None of the games really stood out, and like even now, I have my I think I've shown this off a few times. I bought this one at a couple years back. Two buttons, a D-pad, start, select. That's what made the NES special. Exactly, the controller. Yes, I'll get to that too. I bought this Ghostbusters uh, game. Hey, what's up? And yeah, this one looks really cool compared to the Nintendo one. This one actually looks like it's really good. But going back to what we just said there, the controller. I thought I had probably all plugged in over there, but I had like if you look at the Atari joystick, got like one here. This this was one I used for my Atari. It's got two buttons, but it's the same button, the same trigger. So you got the joystick and you got your button, and that was it. So to get the Nintendo gamepad that fit nicely in your hand with the the D-pad feel to it, the different buttons, the start, the select, really did make a change. Now, for me, it was a little different in my experience, being that I grew up with the Intellivision, which had a ton of buttons. So it wasn't too much of a shock for me because I was used to that. I was used to the holding the controller, having the the circular disc, which is essentially a D-pad. I mean, it's very similar to a D-pad, and then having a myriad of buttons and buttons on the side. So for me, growing up with the Intellivision, um, seeing something like the Nintendo wasn't that mind blowing, but just having that simplicity of the feel of it and having that amount of buttons just felt right. I mean, the Atari only and even the Commodore 64 only having the one button um, really did limit play. And I talk about that like um, my first experience with this game here, Castlevania. My first real experience playing Castlevania was on the Commodore 64. And at the time I didn't have the Nintendo version. Actually, probably when I played this on the Commodore, I didn't even have a Nintendo yet. And um, Castlevania, you need to use the whip, you need to use your item. You got the jumping. So playing it with a single stick controller, much like this one, and utilizing just a single button made things difficult, made it much more difficult. But when you get used to playing on a Nintendo controller, the D-pad, um, it, it's completely different, worlds apart. The other thing is too, we had those Game and Watch things. Like there was that time where Tiger Electronics made a ton of games, the Game and Watch. Actually, where is it? I got one right here. These little guys. Um, this one's not much to look at because it only has the two buttons, but there was one I have over there, the Super Mario Brothers one. But they made some that had the D-pad on the one side, and they could. Whoa! Just lost something. Lost the back cover. That ain't good. So they had the D-pad already there. Try and find my. There it is. Don't want to lose that. You can't put the batteries in. That's not good. But these things kind of came out and paved the way towards the D-pad, which is cool. And I guess they thought, if you can play something like this on a little tiny handheld, why not do that with the controller? Um, Versus, where I got used to something like this. This is the Intellivision 2 controller, which is a lot more complicated. There's more buttons, obviously. You got the side buttons, you got the D-pad, you got the number key. And in fairness, a lot of games didn't even utilize a lot of the buttons. Some of them did, like Utopia, Dungeons and Dragons. Some of them you did have to. But playing games like Burger Time, you just needed your D-pad, uh, kind of thing, and your main fire button. So it was interesting to go from that transition of playing on the Intellivision to getting used to the Commodore 64 slash Atari joystick to moving into the Nintendo. And of course, then we moved up from there. I mean, Super Nintendo added some more buttons, and then along comes PlayStation, and then the Xbox, and then frankly, the modern day Xbox controller frightens me with the amount of buttons it has on it, and I'm just like, ah. But anyways, that's just how it goes. I'm not a modern gamer myself, so it never really affected me. Of course, then there was other games like Castlevania 2, which came out, and I remember my friend and I don't know if we were renting it or if he owned it. I can't remember now. I know he had the game. I just don't know if he was renting it or if we were whatever. But getting into games where it takes a long time to figure the damn thing out. And that was another thing that I didn't have a whole lot of experience with before Nintendo. I mean, yeah, there was a few Commodore 64 games like that, Impossible Mission, but even those games, they were more you sit down and you do it in one sitting. Um, to have these games now where you got to play them, like Dragon Warrior, building up a character and saving it and coming back to the game. So like Simon's Quest was a good example of that. Playing it and playing it and playing it and saving it and trying different save states and getting passwords to save it was really cool. I mean, that was something different. It was something that we didn't really do too often in the past. And even with the third one, I got the third one here, Dracula's Curse, which I mean, I don't know which one's my favorite. I probably I don't know. I like this one. I like this one. It's got the feel of the first one, but it's got the longevity, like the long play of the second one. It's just a really good game. It's just a lot going on here, and you got multiple ways of playing it, and you could save your progress in multiple ways. But I just can't get past how fun this one is. It's just the second one. Just I don't know what it is. The music, the feel of it, the storyline. I just like it. I like that you're going after Dracula like that, and I mean, it feels almost like the second one feels like it's almost like it's incomplete because you get through some mansions where there's not even an end boss. You just walk right through, you grab the thing and leave. Um, but I still like it. I don't know. There's just something about it. Castlevania 3 was peak NES gaming. I agree. I think it was, one of those games where they really hit the nail on the head and they did it right. They made a great game. Um, much like this guy, you know, Super Mario Brothers 1, great game, loved it. Mario Brothers 2, enjoyed it. 3, I couldn't get enough of this game. I mean, me and my friends, we would have like all night parties playing this game, seeing how far we can get, seeing, you'd play it with the warp whistles, then you'd play it without the warp whistles. See if you can get through. See how long it would take you to get from to World 4, World 5. There was a lot of these things that we just did. I mean, and versus in the past, like playing on the Intellivision, like I said, was fun, but most of the time the games are very short. We played games like boxing and um, snafu, and these are games that you play for like 5 minutes, and then you're like, okay, I don't want to play anymore. Hey, it's Papa Pete. What's going on with the Papa Pete? So yeah, the experience I would say of playing on the NES, it's just had that different feel to it. And even today, like the Nintendo Switch has the NES emulator on there, and you can play your Nintendo games on the Switch. And I just think that that's really cool. Like that in itself makes it worth owning the Switch for me because I'm like I said, I'm not a modern gamer, but having access to being able to play all these games, having to be able to do it without having to like bring my original Nintendo, which is discolored right now. It's it's faded throughout the years. Um, having to hook that up to the TV and plug in these massive bricks of a video game cartridge, um, which I would say is this itself leads to the iconic feel of the Nintendo. I mean, when you see one of these things, it really gives you that like that nostalgic feel versus a an Atari game. Like I guess I could. I mean, there's nothing really exciting about this. I mean, this is what is this? Circus Atari. This is a old one. It just had a label on it. It was all text. Nothing exciting about it. Very bland. Just very square, rectangular, black, boring. And then to get something like this, to get a this like cartridge where they put a lot of style and pizzazz in there. Yes, this has a the sticker from the store I bought it at used. I believe the store was called Microplay. They don't exist anymore. They haven't existed for a long time here. But they put these stupid, dumb ass yellow stickers on their cartridges. I don't know why. You'd expect from a video game store something better than that. Um, for them to just slap this ugly ass sticker. Like you get that at garage sales or you get that at flea markets. Uh, Even some of my Intellivision games, I think my Utopia on the box they put this big ugly yellow sticker on there. But as I was saying though, the iconic look of the NES cartridge. I mean, the size of it. It's huge. It's humongous. It looks like nothing you've seen before. you can't compare it to anything before it. I mean, the original cartridges, the Atari cartridges, yeah, the Intellivision had their little unique look to it. Had the little cut slant to it. They were smaller, but when you look at this, you look at the ColecoVision cartridge. A lot of them look the same. The Atari 7800. Some of them are just a little bit smaller, but very drab looking. Not really well designed. This had that the little thing here to stick your hand in, little things like that. Just made the Nintendo that little extra special. In fact, the one thing that always delighted me was when Game Boy came out and they made their cartridges look like tiny little Nintendo NES cartridges. That always fascinated me. I always loved that. That you got these little kind of small version of the NES cartridge, and that right there is what kind of really sold me on the whole Nintendo product, that they would do something like that, because clearly they could have done, and they did. I mean, if you look at the later on Nintendo uh, Game Boy Advance, it was like half the size. They started changing the shape. They started changing the look, but still, the iconic look of that cartridge. And whenever you see anything today where they're talking about retro '90s, retro '80s, and all that stuff, you're almost guaranteed you're going to see the outline or the impression of a Nintendo NES cartridge. It's just inevitable. You're going to see it. Very iconic of the day. And of course, got to talk about this too. I'm glad you said this. There's those so tied to this physical. Yeah, the physical cartridges. A lot of it is emotional and tied into that. And the thing I wanted to talk about too is, it gave us not just the classic games that we think of, Super Mario Brothers, Zelda, Metroid, Kid Icarus. It also included a lineup of some of the classic arcade games, which they didn't have to do that. Obviously, um, Atari. I think that was one of the things with Atari was like the 7800, the Atari 5200, the 2600. They really recycled the same games over and over and over again. They had, oh, this machine has Pac-Man, this machine has Pac-Man, this machine has Pac-Man, Centipede, Centipede. So when Nintendo came out, a lot of the titles were very original. But then they ended up doing this as well. They said, hey, we can give you some of the arcade classics, and they did a really good job. This is Donkey Kong 3. Frankly, I didn't even know Donkey Kong 3 existed until I saw this. I saw this in a store. It was like they even put a sticker on the back too. I saw this in like a flea market type of store. It's like a little tiny shop. Some guy had like games, and I'm like, I didn't know Donkey Kong 3 even was a game. I'd never even seen it in the arcade. I didn't even know it existed. I knew about Donkey Kong. I knew about Donkey Kong Jr. And I saw this and I'm like, seriously, there's a Donkey Kong 3? And of course, it's the Arcade Classic series. It says it right there. And yeah, I bought this, and this was my first experience ever playing this game. Um, and yeah, I played it quite a bit. In fact, this was my reference when I was programming the Intellivision version, which is going to be released this year at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. You will see my Intellivision Donkey Kong 3 for sale at the Intellivision Revolution booth. Hopefully, I'll get my own copy soon. Um, Another one that this is one here. This was one that really stuck out to me. Donkey Kong Classics. I actually bought this one. I remember, quite a long time ago, going back to the mid '90s. Um, I was in downtown Toronto, um, and there was a video game store, and I went in and I saw this, and I'm like, "Oh wow, Donkey Kong on the Nintendo," and I didn't know it existed on the Nintendo at the time. And when I saw this, I was excited, but it was expensive. I mean, this was at a time now when they were getting more scarce. A lot of the Nintendo games were either, it was a weird time for Nintendo at that time. I think maybe even the Super Nintendo came out. I'm not sure, but I remember seeing this in a store and it was used, and I think it was like $50, which was a lot for me for a game. And it sat on my brain, and I'm like, I gotta have it. I gotta have it. I gotta have it. I gotta have it because I love Donkey Kong. If you know me, you know I love Donkey Kong. Hey, it's the Intellivision Gamer. And so the next time I was downtown Toronto, well, I was with my brother, and I'm like, you got to pull over to that store. I got to run in there for a minute. And he's like, all right, pull over. I ran in there and I bought this. I came running out. I'm like, yeah, I got a new uh, Nintendo game, and I showed it to my brother. He's like, "That's just Donkey Kong. What the hell do you want that for?" I'm like, "Donkey Kong is my favorite game. It exists on the Nintendo. I have to have it." And this one comes with Donkey Kong Jr., so definitely had to have this one. Even though I paid a lot of money for this, I paid like $50, like 25, 30 years ago, whenever the heck that was. I was a teenager. uh, I had to have it because it's a console that has a lot of meaning in my life and a game that I loved so much. I played this to death on the Intellivision, and then I ended up getting it on the Atari, and I played it on my Commodore 64. I didn't get a whole lot of experience playing the arcade version because I didn't have a lot of arcades around me at the time when I was a kid. By the time I was able to start going to arcades on my own, um, these types of games were almost long gone. It was RoboCop and Chase HQ and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and those were the arcade games that were existing at the time that Donkey Kong was out. But being able to play it on the actual Nintendo was really cool. Um, that being said, it was a disappointment that it was missing the Pie stage. That is missing the Pie stage. Um, but whatever. I mean, I ended up with Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., so two great games on the system. I eventually ended up picking up the just the Donkey Kong game. I think I got that over there somewhere. Right, right, right here. I ended up picking up this one from the same guy that I got the Donkey Kong 3 for. I think he was selling this for like $10, and I'm like, I have the classic. I have the Donkey Kong Classic, but for some reason I wanted this, so I bought it. Um, More for nostalgia feel for just to have it. It's a cool looking cartridge, and it's got Donkey Kong on there. It says Donkey Kong. And this is just the one game. Obviously, the other one. This is classics, has both games. So I was just, but this is a great showpiece. That's another thing. I mean, these games, Nintendo games, make for great showpieces. They look good. I mean, they look a heck of a lot better than some of the Atari cartridges. Yeah, some of the newer, more interesting Atari cartridges came out, like Keystone Capers or whatever. They had some nice graphics on it, but nothing beats this. This is like a nice molding, a nice masterpiece. People love to put these things on display. So like that's another iconic piece of the whole Nintendo puzzle, if you want to say, of why this system was so special and why it meant so much. Um, just the look and feel of it. Gotta love the plastic cartridge, and of course, we had the NES Classic, which came out. Um, which at first I was kind of excited about it. I don't know why. I thought this is great, you know, but then I was kind of disappointed in that it seemed like it came out in a very limited amount or small runs where it was essentially all sold out everywhere, and the only people selling them were scalpers trying to get like $200 for an emulation box, and it kind of pissed me off. I was like, I thought it would be cool, if it was something that was like an abundance of them, you could pick one up at your local Walmart for $50. I probably would have done that. I probably would have went and bought one. But when it became like they just disappeared off the shelf, because it was kind of cool to be able to play. It had this little Nintendo looking box. It looked like a miniature Nintendo. Has the controllers that are, I think they're full size controllers. They look neat, and they look cool. And you can just plug it directly into your HDMI TV. You don't have to deal like you can plug the original Nintendo in if you know what you're doing. With the coax cable and all that crap, or throw the RCA cables into your VCR or whatever. But to just have this little box that I could like plug into my um, directly into the TV to the HDMI, and play Nintendo games the way they should have been played. I just thought that blowing on the cartridge, that's a good one. Um, I just thought that it would, it'd be cool. Um, but then it just got disappointing that it just became a big cash grab of people picking them up. I still see them today. I go into some video game stores, and they'll have one there, an NES Classic in box, and it'd be like $250 or some ridiculous amount of money. And I'm like, no, I still have my Nintendo. I can buy a Retron. I can buy, there's a lot of ways. I can emulate every single Nintendo game on my PC and just have a Nintendo PC controller. I don't need that box. And so, yeah, I kind of got annoyed, but I did like how it did kind of make that comeback. Uh, and then, of course, they made the Super Nintendo version of it. I think everybody's still waiting on them to do like an N64 or whatever. But the iconic Nintendo NES, I think that's where it was at. And I think a lot of us would want something like that to come back. And I don't know, I don't know why they decided to make it like that. I don't know if it was like intentionally they made it a limited amount. If they thought there wouldn't be enough interest in it to mass produce it. Like the fact that I can't just walk into a Walmart or Best Buy or wherever and just pick one up willy nilly. Uh, you know, Unlike things like the at games things like these things, where they were everywhere. You can get yourself an Atari at games easily. They those even those they started to like limit them, but still, the NES one, I think was a much more iconic. I see the rip-off version of it, or the fake ones, whatever you want to call it. It looks like the NES Classic. It's loaded with like a 500 games, but they're like a lot of them are like the Japanese games with subtitles or something, or it's not the same thing. Like I remember seeing it in one of the flea markets. They have like a ton of them. It doesn't say Nintendo on it. Would you buy an NES Plus? Yeah, an NES Plus. That would be interesting too. That's kind of like the Famicom or the Retron. I mean, the Retron. Um, but yeah, I saw one in a local flea market, and they're selling them for like $24, and it looks sort of like a Nintendo. It looks kind of like the NES Classic, tiny little Nintendo looking thing. But the list of games, when I was scrolling through it, I'm like, what is that? What is that? What is that? What is that? And it had all these weird names, and obviously it's not the same thing. It's probably like just some knockoff illegal emulation device that some company threw together to try and make some bucks. But the original NES Classic looked cool, and it's a shame that it to me that device seemed like it was built for people who grew up playing Nintendo, that maybe got rid of their Nintendo, maybe their Nintendo stopped working or whatever, or they just ended up in the past, to get that experience again, to play yeah, like I said, you can play Nintendo on the Switch, which is cool. I mean, if you have a Switch, You can play it with your Switch controller. You can play, some Nintendo classics. But to have that feel again, to be able to play on the original Nintendo controller with a device that looks like a Nintendo plugged into your computer or your TV, and have all these games available. I just thought that that was really cool. Yeah, a plus would be awesome. Much like Atari is doing right now, where they have the Atari 2600 Plus, which is essentially the same idea, but you actually have to plug a cartridge into it. Um, and from what I understand, it's much like the Retron. The Retron that came out, there's like what, five of them. For what, the first one, it played Nintendo only, and then they made another one that took a Nintendo cartridge and then a Super Nintendo, and then they started branching off. Oh, now it takes a Sega Genesis, and it takes this, and it takes a Game Boy, and the Retron 5. Um, and I learned about that. I kind of read about those, and I heard lots of complaints about the controller sucking, or lag, or they die after a while. It's one of those things. Like they even made the Retron 77, which is essentially the Atari, uh, just like the Atari 2600 Plus, but you know, and then they had firmware. You had to update the firmware. Some of them had the ability to plug in a USB or an SD card and play, add games to it. That they're kind of neat. But still, I don't think they're on the same vein as when the NES Classic came out, and I just thought that that was a great follow up to the you know being able to have that experience. But like someone mentioned, you don't have to blow on it to get the game to work, which that was another Nintendo thing. Um, I never did that in the past. I never blew on I never blew on a cartridge prior to Nintendo. I didn't sit there with my Intellivision cartridge blowing on it to get it to work. I never did that with the Atari, or any console prior to the Nintendo. I don't even know where that even came from. The whole blowing on your Nintendo cartridge. It just sort of became a thing, um, and everybody was doing it. And now, of course, today there's talk about whether that was actually really good, whether it actually did anything. In my case, sometimes I felt like it didn't. Um, Actually, I remember a lot of times to try for whatever reason to get my Nintendo to play the damn game. Blowing on it didn't always work, but if I put it in just enough where it was like just a slight bit out of the system, and then I popped it down, that would get it to work. I don't know why. Maybe it was just the force of it going in. I don't know. I found that often worked. I think a lot of people had their own little trick about how to get the game to work. Anyways, yeah, my phone is going to die soon. So I guess that's a sign that this video is done. But anyways, thanks everybody for popping in. Great seeing a lot of people. Like I said, this was just kind of a thought to do this kind of like a live. I was just going to do this like a regular video, but I thought let's do a stream. It'll be fun. Get to see some people's thoughts in there. Come back after the video uploads. Leave some comments down in the comments below. What was special about the Nintendo to you? And if it wasn't, what system was? I always like to hear it. If the Nintendo wasn't your thing, if it wasn't your groove, what was? Was it the Sega or the Master System? Was it the ColecoVision? Was it the PlayStation? I always love to hear what you have to say. Anyways, hope you liked the stream. Hope you liked the video. Hope you subscribe. And I'll talk to you guys all later.